Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unworthy History. Today we got some more actual history for you from this book right here, Indian Depredations in Texas by J.W. Wilbarger, published in 1889. Now today's story is episode 6 of the tale of Cynthia Ann Parker and her family. She was abducted back in 1836, and now we're in 1858. This is actually the second part of the Battle of Antelope Creek, and the first part, Powhibit's Quasho, or Iron Jacket, was killed. But another division under the vigilant Peta Nocona was soon marching through the hills north of the Canadian River. Though 10 miles distant, his quick ear had caught the first sounds of battle, and soon he was riding, with Cynthia Ann by his side, at the head of 500 warriors. About 1 o'clock of the afternoon, the last of the Rangers returned from the pursuit of Powhibit Quasho's discomfited braves, just in time to anticipate this threatened attack. As Captain Ross, who was one of the last to return, rode up, he inquired, "What hour of the morning is it, Colonel?" "Morning!" exclaimed Colonel Ford. "It is 1 o'clock of the afternoon." So unconscious is one of the flight of time during an engagement that the work of hours seems comprised within the space of a few moments. "What are you in line of battle for?" asked Ross. "Look at the hills there, and you will see," calmly replied Colonel Ford, pointing to the hills some half a mile distant, behind which the forces of Peta Nocona were visible, an imposing line of 500 warriors drawn up in battle array. Colonel Ford had, with 221 men, fought and routed over 400 Comanches, and now he was confronted by a stronger force, fresh from their village still higher up on the Canadian. They had come to drive the palefaces and their hated copper-colored allies from the captured camp, to retake prisoners, to retake over 400 head of horses and an immense quantity of plunder. They did not fancy the defiant state of preparations awaiting them in the valley, however, and were waiting to avail themselves of some incautious movement on the part of the Rangers, when the wily Peta Nocona with his forces would spring like a lion from his lair, and with one combined and desperate effort swoop down and annihilate the enemy. But his antagonist, Colonel Ford, was a soldier of too much sagacity to allow any advantage to a vigilant foe. The two forces remained thus contemplating each other for over an hour, during which time a series of operations ensued between single combatants, illustrative of the Indian mode of warfare, and the marked difference between the nomadic Comanches and the semi-civilized Tonkawas. The Tonkawas took advantage of ravines, trees, and other natural shelter. Their arms were rifles and six-shooters. The Comanches came to the attack with shield and bow and lance, mounted on gaily caparisoned and prancing steeds, and flaunting feathers and all the gorgeous display incident to Indian finery and pomp. They are probably the most expert equestrians in the world. A Comanche warrior would gaily canter to a point halfway between the opposing lines, yell a defiant war whoop, and shake his shield. This was a challenge to single combat. Several of the friendly Tonkawas who accepted such challenges were placed hors de combat, or out of combat by their more expert adversaries, and in consequence Colonel Ford ordered them to decline the banters, much to the dissatisfaction of Placido, who had conducted himself throughout the series of engagements with the bearing of a hero. Says Colonel Ford, "In these combats the mind of the spectator was vividly carried back to the days of chivalry, the jousts and tournaments of knights, and to the concomitants of those scenic exhibitions of gallantry. The feats of horsemanship were splendid, the lances and shields were used with great dexterity, and the whole performance was a novel show to civilized man." Colonel Ford now ordered Placido with a part of his warriors to advance in the direction of the enemy, and if possible to draw them in the valley, so as to afford the Rangers an opportunity to charge them. This had the desired effect, and the Rangers were ready to deliver a charge, when it was discovered that the friendly Indians had removed the white badges from their heads, because they served as targets for the Comanches. Consequently, the Rangers were unable to distinguish friend from foe. This necessitated the entire withdrawal of the Indians. The Comanches witnessed these preparations and now commenced to recoil. The Rangers advanced. The trot, the gallop, the headlong charge followed in rapid succession. Lieutenant Nelson made a skillful movement and struck the enemy's left flank. The Comanche line was broken. A running fight for 3 or 4 miles ensued. The enemy was driven back wherever he made a stand. The most determined resistance was made in a timbered ravine. Here one of Placido's warriors was killed, and one of the Rangers, young George W. Paschal, was wounded. The Comanches left some dead upon the spot and had several more wounded. After routing them at this point, the Rangers continued to pursue them some distance, intent upon taking the women and children prisoners. But Peta Nocona, by exercise of those commanding qualities which had often before signalized his conduct on the field, succeeded in covering their retreat, and thus allowing them to escape. It was now about 4 p.m. Both horses and men were almost entirely exhausted, and Colonel Ford ordered a halt and returned to the village. Brave old Placido and his Tonkawa warriors fought like so many demons. It was difficult to restrain them. So anxious were they to wreak vengeance upon the Comanches. In all of these engagements, 75 Comanches bit the dust. The loss of the Rangers was small, 2 killed and 5 or 6 wounded. The trophies of Pohebit's Quasho, including his lance, bow, shield, headdress, and the celebrated coat of scale mail, was deposited by Colonel Ford in the State Archives at Austin, where doubtless they may yet be seen as curious relics of bygone days. The lamented old chief Placido fell a victim to the revengeful Comanches during the latter part of the great Civil War between the North and South, being assassinated by a party of his enemies on the reservation near Fort Sill. The venerable John Henry Brown, some years since, paid a merited tribute to his memory through the columns of the Dallas Herald. Of Placido it has been said that he was the soul of honor and never betrayed a trust, that he was brave to the utmost. We have only to refer to his numerous exploits during his long and gratuitous service on our frontiers. He was implicitly trusted by Burleson and other partisan leaders, and rendered invaluable services in behalf of the early Texas pioneers, in recognition of which he never received any reward of a material nature, beyond a few paltry pounds of gunpowder and salt. Imperial Texas should rear a monument commemorative of his memory, but I am digressing from the narrative proper. Doubtless Cynthia Ann Parker rode from this ill-starred field, with her infant daughter pressed to her bosom, and her sons, 2 youths of about 10 and 12 years of age, at her side, as fearful of capture at the hands of the hated whites, as years ago, immediately after the massacre of Parker's Fort, she had been anxious for the same. So that's the end of the Battle of Antelope Hills, where Pohebit's Quasho fell, and Peta Nocona survived, although he was completely routed. So if you want to see the other episodes, then you can check out this playlist. And in the next episode, we'll hear about Lawrence Sullivan Ross and the Battle of the Wichita. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.